Hello, everybody. David here. Welcome. Here we share true stories from real people. Today, starting out with the first story. My sister wants me to pay for her daughter's wedding, so I work twice as hard. But then they both mock my work and I decide not to pay anything. My sister came to me begging, absolutely pleading for me to help pay for her daughter's wedding. Well, you know what? I'm the only one who's really in a position to help, and it won't hurt me to help, so why not? I'll give some money for it. But then I found out a secret about, well, my sister and her little daughter. My husband is deceased. I met my husband on a dating site when I was 20. I logged in, and there was this super cute face. I clicked and saw that he lived 1,700 miles away. Well, I clicked away immediately because, what's the point? A few days later I decided, what's the worst that can happen? And I sent a message. And he replied. Within a week, we were talking every day, and within a month, it was 3 times a day on Skype. He lived in Texas, I lived in California. I flew to see him a few months later, and he flew to see my family a few months after that. I flew once more and stayed forever. We got married a year after we met and continued living with his parents. We never had children because he was quite volatile and paranoid all the time when kids were around him. After our wedding, he wanted to dive into a hobby that was fun, interesting, and social, and that could earn us some extra money. He had always liked tastefully modified or customized cars, so he got a car and worked on his car modification skills at home in our small garage. Then he started working on more cars, providing more and more modifications for friends and local enthusiasts. He had friends with mechanical skills and a place to get his parts very cheap. After many years of hard work, he gained a reputation in town for his expertise and quality work. So he started joining these Facebook groups for car meets in our area. He would go to these events and meet a lot of car enthusiasts. At that time, he focused on building a small but loyal customer base and made around $50,000 in doing so. For big jobs, he would rent a 2-car garage out of town for about $350 in a month. The demand grew, and he focused on specializing in high-end and luxury sports car modifications. It was a lot of work for him, and I wanted to relieve some of his stress, So I cooked his favorite dishes, made sure the house was clean, tried to get him to go for walks, brought him food, snacks, and water, etc. We had 9 wonderful years together until he suddenly died of a heart attack, completely out of nowhere. I don't know, one minute he was telling me to sleep, and the next I heard a loud noise and sat up only to see him collapsed in front of the desk. The paramedics worked on him for almost an hour before they came to tell me he was gone. So after that, I fell into a dark hole, and well, I came out of it. Although it was a strange feeling how I had to end my life without him. I missed him so much. I did, and I had moments of rage and pain, but I moved on. I also threw myself into work. I reached out to my husband's network of professionals and clients, and started watching car channels on YouTube. Even, attended workshops and learned from many internet forums. My biggest fear in taking over was failing and ruining my husband's long-standing business. I always questioned whether I was making the right decision or ruining his legacy. And keeping his dream alive was probably the biggest challenge. Gradually, I took on more responsibilities. The business was already successful, so I didn't try to reinvent the wheel. I just kept making small changes over time to offer better services. Although it's not as successful as before, I still keep the shop profitable. And currently, I do all the work myself. Modifications, maintenance, whatever. Modifying cars is hard, but it taught me a lot, and I've made so many lifelong friends with other car enthusiasts over the years. It's very rewarding to take a sports car from start to finish, and add your own personal touches everywhere without ruining the car's character. Plus, it's also financially amazing. However, my sister Rachel always asked me, why do people like to change things on their vehicles? Or, a car is only used to go from point A to point B, why do people spend money on that? Why do they try to turn their car into something it's not? Why do you want to lift so much weight? Why are you doing this? It already looks good enough, don't ruin it. They're made to be as they are. I never understood why she cared so much about what people did with their property. Despite this, I've always tried to maintain a peaceful relationship with her. When we were kids, we weren't treated equally or held to the same standards by our parents. I was always expected to be a hardworking, responsible girl who made the right decisions. But Rachel was encouraged to have fun, and our parents rescued her every time she made an irresponsible decision. For example, when she simply did poorly in school or something like that, they would just pay tutors to do her homework. But if I really struggled in a subject, they told me to figure it out on my own. When she was 18, Rachel had an affair with my then boyfriend while we were still together. And my parents never really held her accountable for her actions. Soon she decided to marry him in private. In my family, we have the term ICU baby for unplanned family members. This should be a sign that my family sucks. I was an ICU baby, and so was my niece Olivia. Due to my parents' favoritism, I'm honestly closer to my husband's parents than to my own. When my husband passed away, they told me that I would always have a place with them. I call them mom and dad, and they will be so for the rest of my life. The immediate acceptance and love I received from them made me love them 1,000,000 times more than anything I felt for my own family. I'm very fortunate to care for them in their old age. Fast forward to now. Last fall, Olivia announced her engagement to her soulmate Chris. Overall, a great guy. Respectful, faithful, reliable, and humble. I couldn't be happier. I watched her grow into a young adult and spent a lot of time with her. I love her and see her as my own daughter. When she was a child, she didn't have much. So whenever I visited her, I tried to spoil her the best I could, especially as the business improved. I did everything I could to support her and even started a fund for her recently to help her pursue her chosen master's degree. In early spring, she announced the date and location of her dream wedding, and I was excited for her. I've been helping her plan things since there were only about 9 months until the wedding day. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Chris lost his job and apartment 7 months before the wedding day and couldn't find a way to get a new job without having to move. So, Rachel asked me to help pay for the wedding. Neither she nor her husband has a job, and although she is in a doctoral program, they are living off some of her research funds, which is not enough to live on. She has never worked a day in her life, and they currently reside in an apartment that his parents are paying for. Olivia has not yet graduated. My parents have several health problems and no savings, and they cannot help financially at all. So I agreed to step in and contribute along with Chris' parents to pay for the wedding. You know, nothing too expensive or extravagant, but we all agreed it was a nice gift for the newlyweds to start their life together. I was taking on more projects, even when it meant I was exhausted. I worked tirelessly to save for the dream wedding my niece wanted. The venue required a small deposit, a payment 6 months before the wedding date, and then a final payment 1 day before the wedding. The venue is owned by a friend of Rachel's, so he agreed. The first 2 payments were made by me and Chris' parents as scheduled. I paid for the main costs, specifically the venue, chairs, tables, linen rentals, catering, and an open bar. The catering bill was due at the time of the final count, rentals were due upon delivery, and the bar bill was due upon closing the bar. A few days before the wedding day, we were having dinner at my parents' house. Rachel, my brother-in-law, Olivia, Chris, my aunt, and my older cousin were there. My aunt was asking Rachel about the wedding, and Rachel said everything was going as planned and then casually laughed and told Olivia, "Let's hope the wedding doesn't end up looking like your aunt's car modifications." Well, I was completely stunned. She laughed, and Olivia laughed too, as if it were some sort of inside joke. I was in shock. Olivia was never like this. I don't know, it just happened so fast. I stood up and started yelling at Rachel, but my parents asked me to calm down, and Rachel said calm down, it was just a joke, and she didn't think I would react so intensely. My dad said I was being too harsh, in fact. I mean, it's just a joke, right? And that I know how she is with her dark sense of humor. My brother-in-law and my aunt remained seated, and my cousin asked me to calm down, drink some water, but I just grabbed my things and left. I heard a big commotion as I was leaving too, and Chris and my cousin followed me outside to try to talk to me, but you know what? I just wanted to be left completely alone. The next day I was in my garage and Rachel, Olivia, and Chris came and saw me working, my skin sweaty, oily and greasy. Well, Rachel and Olivia let out a giggle and called my work a waste of time. They called my clients clowns and said this job is terrible, dirty and hard. Chris tried to stop them and make them apologize for everything they said, but Rachel continued saying that I'm a woman and car modifications are men's work and that it's disgusting for women to want to work on cars. Chris defended me and said, obviously it's a woman's work because a woman is doing it. Look, she replied, a woman cannot perform as well as a man. She may rise to a mental job, sure, as easily as a man, but absolutely not when it comes to something physical. Chris asked her what the hell was wrong with her and scolded her, saying I was the one financing the wedding. Her response was, it's not like she's going to go back on her promise over an opinion. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me react to that, so I let it go. I spent the next few days pretending everything was fine. During the rehearsal dinner, which was yesterday, I overheard the conversation. Yeah, this place really sucks. Well, who orders a steak in a place like this? Actually, who chooses a place like this for a pre-wedding dinner? Well, you should blame your aunt. She insisted it had to be the perfect atmosphere for a pre-wedding gathering. Oh, the only thing scarier than this steak is the idea of blaming her for it. She gets offended by almost everything I say. She should learn to be a good little maid. You know what, that was too much for me. I took Olivia to a private place and told her I heard what she just said about me being her good little maid. I don't appreciate her joke, it wasn't funny. And I felt humiliated. She got angry and started yelling things like, I have a whole pre-wedding event waiting for me out there. Who do you think you are to bring me here and waste my time? It's a joke, don't be such an idiot. She accused me of ruining the event and started yelling at the top of her lungs. She went back to the event, and I just stood there. When I returned, everyone was staring at me, and Olivia was sobbing in her dad's arms. He proceeded to yell at me, telling me I ruined the event and caused a scene. Then Rachel said that the coordinator had just called her and said that the owner wanted the final payment if they wanted the venue doors to be unlocked. She assumed I had already paid and asked me why I hadn't done so yet. Well, I told her the offered money had been rescinded and I wouldn't give another cent. She went crazy and said I'd be an idiot for not keeping my promise. When I reminded her of the things she said, she dismissed them as jokes and accused me of being petty. My mom told me to be a better person and said I was being incredibly selfish and bitter. I told them I was tired of being treated like I couldn't do my job. It's exasperating, and mostly, they don't like me because they see I have many male friends and get along better with men than with women. They think I'm too ambitious. Chris apologized for Olivia and asked if I would consider giving them $5,000, and I said no. Rachel was crying and said this would ruin her daughter's wedding. She wanted me to reconsider my decision since it would damage my relationship with Olivia, but I refused. She kept crying and begging for the funds, but I told her no. Olivia turned very cold and said, "You always brag about having a good memory. I hope you remember this moment." I told her, "Don't bite the hand that feeds you. It's just stupid to mock me all the time and then suddenly expect me to happily throw money at you." My brother-in-law got visibly upset, but after receiving looks from the guests, he said I only had to pay for the venue. I told him I wouldn't give anything for his daughter's wedding. Then he joined the chorus of insults, called me everything, and also involved his parents in it. Rachel then made another comment about my career. Everyone laughed. I felt humiliated. She was also laughing, and then continued, and I felt like crying and screaming at the same time. It was a rage and sadness I had never experienced before. After her speech, I spoke. I just responded, "Sister, a quick reminder that you haven't achieved anything in your life without mom or dad holding your hand. As soon as you do, you can criticize my job all you want, right?" She, of course, got offended and started making a scene. My parents and some other relatives said my response was cruel and completely out of line, but my husband's family said she had it coming after insulting me first. Throughout the evening, they continued making these negative comments, mostly directed at my in-laws. I could see my mother-in-law was getting upset. I explained that I wouldn't tolerate them talking to my in-laws that way. Rachel then said I really know nothing about cars and just make them worse and disgrace my husband's honorable status. I got so angry that I told her she had never worked a day in her life and was an incompetent parasite. She responded that if I had only helped my husband with his work, he would still be alive. At this point, I just decided to leave with my in-laws. Apparently, Chris had a big fight with Rachel that night and broke up with Olivia because she sided with her mom. He canceled the wedding, and Olivia is absolutely devastated. I really feel sorry for her. So I contacted the venue and they were very kind and offered a refund, but it will take a few business days before the refund is processed. Today, I texted Olivia that I would no longer be responsible for funding her education. Rachel kept trying to call and then texting, saying I couldn't do this to her. Now our parents are involved and are pressuring me to help. My mom tried to get me to go talk to her, saying Olivia didn't deserve to be abandoned like this. Once again, I told her I couldn't afford it on my maid's salary. Remember? And she said that if Rachel called me a maid, she would laugh and admit that it was pretty accurate. After saying this, I yelled at her and told her there is a big difference between affectionate jokes and obvious malice. I don't mind good-hearted jokes, but they should know what lines not to cross and what constitutes sensitive topics. I really don't know what I'm asking, if I'm overreacting or if I should have just agreed to make the final payments. Well, my in-laws are okay with it since it's my money, but my friends don't support my actions and told me I should have stuck to what we agreed on. Part of me feels they're right, and I'm going against my word, but part of me finds it hard to see the humiliation as a simple joke. Anyway, guys, thanks for reading this far, hoping for any feedback you can provide. Update 1. Hi everyone. I didn't expect to come back here and receive so much support. I really didn't plan to update at all, just wanted to leave what happened behind and share it here, hoping for some advice. After writing everything, I closed my computer and fell into a kind of depressive spiral. After posting it, it hit me like a train, so I'll try to respond more in the post. Honestly, it was too much to try to do everything at that moment. Just know that I read most of the comments. I really appreciate all the opinions, both negative and positive. So, Olivia called me today and started protesting, saying I was affecting her education and I couldn't do that. This is my family, my niece and her future. And I told her she has absolutely no idea what it's like to work and have to pay for everything, or what it's like to work hard and have to support someone who treats you badly. I'm literally giving hours of my life to pay for someone who thinks so little of me. Then she got angry and said she didn't care at all. So I responded, well, these are the consequences of your actions. You can't treat me terribly and then want me to suddenly put on $1,000 smile for you. Now you have 2 free years for missing your dream program to think about how treating someone as less than human is not a good life strategy. Wow. I don't completely blame her for her actions. She is very, very, very lonely and a completely isolated child. It's not an easy household to grow up in, and Rachel can't be a good mother. Well, Olivia is talented, she is an artist, but she doesn't have an open space to express herself at all. She worships the ground her mom walks on and does exactly what her mom wants her to do. Rachel, to this day, hasn't truly apologized. It was a sorry, but not sorry. I can't stop thinking that my husband's death was my fault. My mother-in-law assured me and said it wasn't anyone's fault. My mother-in-law is so sweet and loving, unlike my mom. My father-in-law is much more relaxed and less critical than my own father. We differ a bit in politics and religion, but I am blessed to have them in my life anyway. I miss my husband so much. I miss staying up late talking and having date nights at home. I miss going out and ordering things for each other to try different things. I really miss him. It's been over 10 years, but I still cry occasionally. I have 1 or 2 days each year where it's all I can think about, and I feel this enormous longing and pain in my heart. It still feels like an open wound. Update 2. Thank you so much for responding and taking the time and for the advice. Rachel called me and said Olivia wanted to come visit me for a few weeks to rebuild our relationship, and I said it was fine with me if she wanted to visit. But then it turns out she wants to bring her boyfriend. He is 44 years old. I thought, are you kidding me? But she wasn't joking. At first I said, absolutely no, but after about a week of conversation, I relented with one condition. I told her that if this guy stays in our house, I will ask him questions he may not like. She wanted to know what kind of questions, so I gave her some very specific ones. How did you two meet? Who made the first move? If it was the guy who made the first move, it's weird. Has the guy been married? Does he have kids? Why are you dating such a young woman? What is the end goal here? A serious relationship? A marriage? Have you discussed what will happen if Olivia gets pregnant? I know I'm not Olivia's mom, right? And we're not on good terms, but no one else in her family is asking these tough questions. Rachel is perfectly fine with the relationship, which baffles me. So fast forward to the visit. Olivia and the older guy show up. I'm cordial. I wait until the evening, and after everything is settled and dinner is over, I invite the guy to join me on the porch for a few drinks. You know, just him and me. So I start asking my questions. After just my second question, the guy starts to get very, very defensive. He told me this wasn't any of my business. Well, I got a bit mad. I told him he was staying in my house for a week. I can ask him some questions, and the girl is my niece. I'm not out of line here. He told me I was making him uncomfortable. So I replied that I was uncomfortable having a man who was clearly taking advantage of a young girl in my house. You can answer my questions and act like a decent guy, or feel free to get the hell out. Well, he laughed. Olivia and her parents are mad at me, and they said I acted like a jerk, and that if Olivia is happy I should let it go. Again, they told me it wasn't any of my business. And since then, they have broken up, which I'm glad about. I'm not sure if my actions were the cause of it. I asked my questions in the written order, and only asked the first 2 before he got so uncomfortable. Anyway, I'll keep you updated. Update 3. Hi, so I talked to Olivia this morning and she and I are completely fine. She knew my actions came from wanting to keep her safe. I asked her why they broke up, and it turns out the guy was cheating on his wife. He confessed it to her and said he would divorce her for Olivia. He has 3 kids, all of whom are her age or older. Yep, she left him. Then she asked me why I was so against her and her parents, to the point that I couldn't even pay for her education. I asked her how she could expect me to be okay with my sister mocking me along with her daughter, who was born from an affair with my ex-boyfriend. After that, Olivia was quiet the rest of the afternoon and left early. So later, I received a call from Rachel yelling at me for ruining her family. Apparently, she and my brother-in-law didn't even bother to tell Olivia what they did to me, and now she knows and is so mad at them that she decided to go live with her best friend's family. That's right, she wants to leave them. I'm starting to feel guilty for having told her the truth, as it affected her more than I thought. But at the same time, she is old enough to know the truth, and I don't think I could have lied to her face, even if I had wanted to. Update 4. I decided to follow some of your advice and texted Olivia. I asked if she would like to meet and have a conversation about everything that happened because, as you said, she deserves some answers. So I met with her and told her about my relationship with her mom and went into details about the infidelity and her birth. I went over everything she asked. In turn, she told me everything her parents told her about me. Apparently, they told her that around the time she was born, I had a miracle baby named Olivia who died in the hospital, and because they share the same name, I held some resentment towards her while showing affection outwardly. I'm still processing what she told me, guys. Needless to say, there was a lot of crying involved and apologies from both sides. Olivia said she is better now that she knows the truth, and her best friend and her family have been an incredible support system in helping her get through this. I decided I would do my best to be more involved in her life. She agreed and said she also wanted to get to know me better. I told her she could reach out to me whenever she wanted so she would have someone to talk to about how she was doing and someone to support her hobbies. I even told her my garage is open and explained how it worked. She loved it and said she wanted to work for me. So she announced at the family meeting that she had decided to take a job at my shop. Rachel was shocked and wasn't okay with what was said. Your aunt's job is to make a car look stupid and sound like a fart. Do you want that as your career, honey? Everyone laughed, but Olivia told them they were idiots. They don't understand that people have different tastes. Rachel went to the garage the next day, saw that she was learning things, and sometime later told her Honda hired brilliant engineers, paid them a lot of money to build the NSX to be as perfect as it is, and you, a lazy person, happily ruined it. Olivia responded, "What's the deal if they hired brilliant engineers? But they also hired a marketing team, and a bunch of people gave the engineers crazy requirements and said no to a lot of cool things." The situation worsened at home. Her parents and grandparents were trying to steer her towards a specific field, but she didn't want it. I know her, and she won't do well. They told her either do as she's told, or they would withdraw support, and she would effectively be homeless. My mom was a bad mother to me, and I recognize the same thing happening with Rachel and Olivia. Both my mom and Rachel are horrible with their accidental children. Olivia showed up at my house crying and asked if she could stay with me. She explained that she and her mom had a massive argument and she can't stand to be around her right now. I told her yes, of course, but that she would have to talk to her parents about it. So I contacted Rachel and we talked over the phone. I asked if it was okay for Olivia to stay with me. I let her know that I have no problem with it. She argued with me that everything was fine and she didn't need my help, so I said I didn't think things were fine considering how she was responding to the situation. She yelled at me to mind my own business. Olivia stayed with me last weekend and we had a lot of fun together. She told me she wanted to live with me permanently. I told her I would support her, that she should tell Rachel to go to hell, and that I would back her up. Her parents are obviously upset and Rachel is mad that I'm interfering in the family dynamic and said I'm just giving Olivia what she wants and setting her up for a future of failure. She said that separating a mother from her daughter is the worst thing I could do. They tried repeatedly to tell Olivia that her aunt is not a good person, but she told them to go to hell, so I told her she could stay with me as long as she wanted. Anyway, we've bought a new mattress, bedding, a rug, a desk, a chair, and some decorations for her new room to make the space more her own. My two closest friends, well, they're in the store and they arrived here an hour ago with lots and lots of bags of stuff. They're all in Olivia's room now, going through clothes, shoes, hair products, soap, lotions, potions, perfumes, whatever young women like. These two women are some of my closest friends for a reason. One is a stylist, and told Olivia that if she decides she wants a haircut or color, she just has to let her know. My younger cousin is also flying in and arriving on Thursday, and she'll be staying with us until the end of May. So, I'm sure having her here will be a great help as well. Overall, this incident opened a lot of old wounds, but I'm glad it happened. It needed to happen. Your opinions were really helpful to me in making this decision, and I appreciate it. So, thank you guys. All I can say is that I hope both Olivia and I will probably heal from this and move forward with our lives. Hello, everybody. David here. Welcome. Here we share true stories from real people. Today, starting out with the first story. My father refused to walk me down the aisle because his golden daughter had a housewarming party that day, but he called me desperately when I found a replacement. For a long time, I always knew my parents loved my older sister, Vicky, more than me. She was the planned child, while I was the result of an accidental pregnancy just 10 months later. They probably didn't even want me, but they decided to keep the pregnancy anyway. My mother's parents had passed away before I was born, but my father's parents were very much alive, so they took on a significant role in my upbringing. Grandma and Grandpa were the constants in my life, providing the love and support I often felt was lacking from my own parents. I remember so many occasions when my parents would leave me behind with my grandparents and only take my sister on trips. When I was young, I didn't mind because it was fun living with my grandparents, but as I grew older, around 6 or 7 years old, I realized how unfair it all was. But my problem wasn't just with my parents. It was also with my sister Vicky. Although I didn't hold a grudge against Vicky, I couldn't help but feel like an unwanted addition to the family. She always competed with me for everything, whether it was grades, our parents' attention, or even the smallest achievements. It felt like a constant battle for validation, and I was always on the losing side because my parents preferred her. Always. As a result, I felt really inferior, and we never really understood each other. Our relationship seemed more like a perpetual competition, with her always coming out victorious. On one occasion, she wanted to be friends with a group of girls, but since she was a nerd, she was afraid to approach them. One of the girls and I had art classes together, so she introduced me to the rest of the group and we all used to hang out together. Vicky was so jealous of this that she made my parents talk to me about including her. Moreover, whenever she was with them, she tried to pick fights. But my mom called me selfish while my dad said she was my sister and that I should look out for her. Reluctantly, I agreed and introduced Vicky to the rest of the girls. Now, Vicky didn't have many friends, so she might have seemed overly enthusiastic. She constantly tried to impress the girls in our group, often coming across as annoying. Despite her efforts, she struggled to find her place among them, and the awkward tension between Vicky and the other girls was always palpable. For instance, one of the a boy, so Vicky took it upon herself to approach the boy and let him know the girl liked him. He laughed because he wasn't interested and went around telling everyone, which embarrassed the girl. After this, the girls clearly told me they didn't want Vicky to come to our meetups anymore, so I agreed. However, Vicky didn't take it well. She threw a tantrum when she found out the girls didn't want anything to do with her and insisted to our parents that I shouldn't spend time with these bad girls either, since I was her sister and should stand up for her. I refused and told her it was her fault the girls didn't want to be friends with her, but my parents, as always, took her side. They gave me a lecture about how Vicky didn't have bad intentions, that I should try to convince the girls to forgive Vicky, but if they didn't, then I should stay away from them too. I refused and stood my ground. I liked hanging out with them, and unlike Vicky, I wasn't going to my friendship in any way. I told my parents that I'd had enough, and it wasn't my responsibility to find friends for Vicky. My parents got mad and gave me the cold shoulder for weeks, but I'm glad I stood firm. This group of girls has remained my friends to this day, and they are basically like my sisters. I have cried with them, laughed with them, and shared some of the most significant moments of my life. That wasn't the only reason Vicky came to hate me. There was also another incident involving a boy she had a crush on. A boy I had no idea about, and with whom I sat in some classes because we were friends. He tried to ask me to the prom, but I politely declined because I was already going with someone I liked. Later, when Vicky found out, she made a big fuss about it, telling our parents how I always took the things she wanted, and that I was flirting with the boy, knowing how she had felt about him for months. She called me a bunch of nasty names that no one should say to their own sister, and told my parents how she wished I wasn't her sister. My mother took her side, telling me that what I did was wrong and that, as a sister, I should respect the girl code. I tried to tell them that I wasn't even interested in the boy, and that I had declined his invitation, so she was free to ask him if she wanted, but Vicky refused to let it go. Looking back, I think she knew the boy would have rejected her anyway, so she just wanted to take it out on me, because he had invited me instead of her. Once, my dad took me out for ice cream, telling me he wanted to have some father-daughter time with me. This had never happened before, so I was really happy. However, he started asking me a bunch of questions, like if my boyfriend and I were being careful, if my boyfriend came from a good family, or if my boyfriend and I were doing drugs. I was stunned by his line of questioning and asked him what he meant by all that. That's when my dad revealed that Vicky had been making up stories, telling my parents for months that I was doing drugs and drinking alcohol with my boyfriend. This was a complete lie, and I showed my dad my phone to prove that Vicky was lying. Later, when my dad confronted her about all the lies, she tried to justify it by saying that no one our age just spends time with a boy, and that I was hiding things from everyone. I was so angry that I yelled at her for trying to create unnecessary problems and told her it wasn't my fault she didn't have anyone to go out with, but that she needed to stop meddling in my life. Vicky didn't accept it and hit me. This happened out of nowhere, as she had never been physically violent before. My nose started bleeding as I fell to the floor, holding my face in pain. My parents rushed me to the hospital, pleading with me the whole time not to press charges against Vicky. They kept saying how it would ruin her life, while I sat in the back seat, clutching my face. Vicky didn't even care, nor did she apologize. Later, when the nurse asked me about the incident, I told her the truth, and she called Child Protective Services. My parents were furious with me for involving Child Protective Services, seeing it as a betrayal of family loyalty. In their eyes, Vicky's actions were dismissed as a mere accident, and an isolated incident that didn't warrant such drastic intervention. They pleaded with the authorities, insisting that Vicky was not a danger to me, and that her actions were out of character. In the end, Vicky was released, but they warned my parents that they would be closely monitoring our situation in case of any further incidents. As you can imagine, Vicky was really upset, as were my parents. Later, my parents told me they were disappointed in me for trying to ruin my sister's life. My mother started crying and said I was tearing the family apart by involving outsiders. My father's disappointment was palpable. His words were always full of reproach as he questioned my decision to escalate the situation. I firmly told them I wanted Vicky out of my life, and they agreed. I felt guilty for involving the authorities, but for the first time, I felt safe in my own home. Once Vicky had been formally warned, my parents had a separate conversation with her, and from that day on, she stopped talking to me completely. I much preferred this to having her constantly hovering around or trying to insert herself into my life. When my grandparents found out about this incident, they asked me to pack my things so I could live with them for the rest of high school. They informed my parents, who didn't protest much, so I went to live with my grandparents. Unlike my parents' home, I felt safe and loved here. The remaining days of high school went well, and I made lasting memories with my friends. My parents never visited or called me during that time. I knew they were happy with their beloved daughter, so I never tried to contact them, although it hurt that they could discard me so easily as if I were nothing. When I graduated from high school, my parents made the day all about Vicky. They didn't even congratulate me or approach me, and I felt like a stranger to them. However, my grandparents were there and scolded my parents for being so obvious about their favoritism. I don't know what my grandfather told them, but my dad then awkwardly approached me and congratulated me. Later, I found out that I was accepted into a good university with a full scholarship. I was very happy about this because I was afraid to ask my parents for financial help. I informed my grandparents about this, and they invited me out to dinner at a nice restaurant. After dinner, my grandmother posted photos of me on her Facebook account, writing a long caption about how proud she was of me for being an outstanding student. Our relatives soon found out and joined in the congratulations. I guess some of them might have contacted my parents, who had no idea about all this. Instead of feeling happy about it, my mother called me the next day to tell me that Vicky had locked herself in her room, crying because she hadn't been accepted into any university, and that I was consciously trying to make my sister feel bad about her grades by talking to all our relatives. She said it was all my fault because apparently Vicky was depressed after the incident with Child Protective Services, which had pushed her to get bad grades. I was so incredibly devastated that my own mother could blame me for something like this that it was the last time I spoke to her. My grandparents helped me move into my university dorm. Since my high school boyfriend's university was far away, we broke up, so I entered college single. The breakup had been hard, but I was excited to meet new people. This is where I met Rob, and he and I were both freshmen, spending half of our days in the library. Rob was different from anyone I had met before. He was a quiet person who liked to study, similar to me, and we quickly found common ground in our shared love for university life. As weeks turned into months, our friendship blossomed into something deeper, and I realized I had developed feelings for Rob that went beyond mere friendship. Being an extrovert, I was quite direct about my feelings for Rob, and I was surprised to learn that he felt the same way. We started dating and have been together for 8 years. My grandparents have met Rob and absolutely adore him. I've met Rob's parents, who literally treat me like their own daughter. On occasions, Rob's mother has even confided in me that she always wished for a daughter, so she's happy that Rob met someone wonderful like me. Honestly, this is the first time I've been surrounded by family who appreciate me and don't hold any resentment. I've told Rob stories about my childhood, and he listens and knows about my relationship with Vicky. Over these past 8 years, my parents have barely contacted me, except for the occasional birthday message if they remembered, but that's about it. Recently, Rob and I got engaged. He proposed to me while we were hiking to our usual spot to watch the sunrise, and it was a dream proposal. It was so sweet to see how nervous he was when asking me the question, and I had no doubt in my mind when I accepted his proposal. I posted engagement photos on my Instagram and also informed my grandparents about it. They were so happy for me and congratulated us on our future. I guess the news must have spread because my parents called me out of the blue to congratulate me as well. I thought it was just a casual conversation as we hadn't spoken in years. They asked about my life, my job, my apartment, before my dad directly asked if he could walk me down the aisle. I was surprised by his sudden question since moments before, he didn't even know what company I worked for. I told him I hadn't thought about it yet, and my dad said it would be embarrassing if he wasn't invited and that others would question it, so it would be better if he walked me down the aisle. I told my parents that I wasn't even sure if I was going to invite them to my wedding since we hadn't been in contact, which upset my parents. My mother started telling me how disappointed she was with my response, emphasizing the importance of family and tradition. She continued saying how they would always be my parents no matter what, and that I should leave the past behind. Part of me was tempted to listen to my parents and accept my dad's offer because I wanted our relationship to be repaired, but another part of me doubted, fearing opening myself up again to potential disappointments and hurts. However, I was about to start a new chapter in my life in a few months, so I told my dad that he could walk me down the aisle, and he seemed delighted. During the wedding preparations, I contacted my high school friends, with whom I had always kept in touch, despite the physical distance that had grown between us due to our careers. I told them how I wanted the group to reunite, and that I wanted them to be my bridesmaids. There were many tears of happiness and congratulations, and without hesitation, they accepted my invitation to be part of my bridal party, as it was an opportunity for all of us to get together again. We all planned to go to Las Vegas to celebrate my bachelorette party, while Rob had a separate bachelor party with his friends as well. My friends and I posted a bunch of photos from the party, and in general, everyone had a great time. However, when I returned home, my parents called to inform me how disappointed they were that I hadn't invited Vicky to be part of the celebration. I told them there was no way I would have involved Vicky in my bachelorette party, and that I didn't want her to be part of my life. This surprised my parents, and they asked me what I meant, so I clarified that Vicky's actions, particularly her history of lies and gossip, had left me deeply hurt and distrustful of her intentions. I couldn't imagine inviting her to such an intimate and joyful occasion as my bachelorette party, knowing that her presence would make my party less happy. I also informed my parents that this was why she wasn't invited to my wedding either. Upon hearing this, my parents lost their temper. They complained that I had no right to exclude my sister from my wedding, and that it was my duty as her sister to include her in such important events. They told me that Vicky was excited to see me after hearing that I was getting married. I was confused and asked my parents what gave her that idea, since we hadn't even spoken in a long time. But my parents ignored my concerns, saying that this was not how sisters behaved. I told them that they had to understand that my relationship with Vicky is complicated after everything that has happened. I simply don't feel comfortable having her as part of my wedding. She hasn't even once apologized to me for everything she put me through. However, my parents generally ignored my words. My mother kept saying how she wanted everything to be resolved, and that I should make an effort to invite Vicky. My father insisted that our relatives would talk about why my sister wasn't invited, and this would end up affecting my wedding. However, I knew it was better not to give in to their demands, so I stood my ground. I told them that it was fine for people to talk behind my back and question my character, as long as I was surrounded by people I liked and trusted during my wedding. My mother then asked if my fiancé would be okay with this, and also tried to use the in-laws card, saying they would judge me for being so incredibly cruel as to exclude my own sister from my wedding. I laughed and informed my parents that my fiancé and in-laws were aware of my family dynamics, and none of them would care if Vicky was present or not. They pressured me to reconsider, suggesting the importance of family unity and forgiveness. But I didn't budge an inch, as I wasn't willing to compromise my own well-being for the sake of appeasing others. In the end, we agreed to disagree, each of us holding on to our own perspectives, and my parents told me they needed to think things over. We ended our conversation there. I informed my grandparents about this because I felt a bit guilty about standing up to my parents, and they fully supported me. My grandparents told me I shouldn't force myself to invite anyone I didn't want there, and that my parents, as usual, were trying to make me feel guilty. Since that conversation, I felt a bit better about my decision, and have been distracting myself with wedding preparations. As my wedding date is quickly approaching, last week my dad called me to inform me that he had thought a lot about it, and he and Mom would no longer be attending the wedding. Before I could react, he continued saying that this also meant he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle. I asked if there was a specific reason, and he informed me that Vicky would be moving to a new place soon, which my parents had helped her find, and since I was going to exclude her from the wedding, she had decided to hold her housewarming party on the same day, so they would be attending that instead of my wedding. I couldn't believe what my father was telling me. He wasn't invited in the first place, much less was he going to walk me down the aisle, yet he felt the need to tell me that he was the one deciding not to do it. However, the idea that my own sister's housewarming party took priority over my wedding was a hard blow, a continuation of what I had felt for years. I simply told him that I understood and hung up the call. Although I tried to act brave in front of my father, deep down, the pain of rejection affected me. When I told Rob, he was furious at how insensitive my parents could be after they were the ones who insisted on being invited. He was the one who gave me the idea that I should ask my grandfather, as he and Grandma had been more present in my life than my parents. I agreed, so I called my grandparents and asked if they would be willing to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. I couldn't hold back my emotions while asking my grandfather. "You and Grandma have always been there for me," I said, my voice breaking with emotion. "You've been more than just grandparents to me. You've been like parents, and I can't imagine anyone else I'd want by my side on my wedding day." My grandfather didn't hesitate before saying yes. He told me how honored he would be to walk me down the aisle, and unlike my parents, he wouldn't let me down. His words reassured me, and at that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace. With my grandparents by my side, I knew I had a family that loved me unconditionally and accepted me just as I am, with all my imperfections. I also spoke with my father-in-law about this, and Rob's parents assured me that they didn't care if my parents attended or not, and that regardless of their presence, they were delighted to witness and support our union. My wedding is in 2 days, and today I woke up to several missed calls from my dad. I called him back thinking it was an emergency, and when he answered, he asked if it was true that my grandfather would be walking me down the aisle. I told him yes, it was true, and then my dad got furious, saying how disrespectful it was to ask my grandfather. I reminded him that he was the one who decided not to come to my wedding, so I didn't understand why he was so upset. My dad continued yelling at me about how he and Mom were just trying to make me see the error of my ways, and that they thought by declining the invitation they would teach me a lesson. He went on to say how he and Mom had raised me and paid for my food and education, so my grandfather had no right to replace him. I tried to reason with him, explaining that my grandfather had been there for me in ways he and Mom never were, but he wouldn't listen. He also told me how I had done nothing but push everyone away, and that all this was my fault. I don't think I've done anything wrong in this situation. I guess anyone else would have done the same, but as the subreddit requires me to ask the question, am I the bad one for asking my grandfather to walk me down the aisle and not my father? Update 1. Many have given their opinions, and most have said I'm not in the wrong. I've seen a lot of advice and suggestions on how I should approach this situation. I agree that I need to permanently cut contact with my parents because their constant indecision is exhausting and is starting to affect my mental health. I don't want them in my life when they've consistently shown me that Vicky is always their first priority. My parents are selfish, and I've known this for a long time. However, how can a daughter simply stop loving her parents? It's much easier said than done, but it's very hard to actually do it. However, for my peace of mind, I have no other choice but to do it, so that I can enjoy my wedding tomorrow. Update 2. I apologize for the lack of updates this past month, but I've been quite busy since my wedding. Firstly, yes, my wedding went quite well with my grandfather by my side as I walked down the aisle. Despite my parents' absence, I couldn't have been happier exchanging vows with Rob, committing to spend the rest of our lives together. My friends and I danced all night, and I can't begin to describe how important it is to stay in touch with your childhood friends, no matter what, because sometimes they are your chosen family. During the reception, I felt a slight pang realizing my parents weren't there to share this special moment, especially when I saw Rob's parents and cousins giving speeches for him. However, I found comfort in knowing I had made the right decision for myself, prioritizing my own well-being and happiness. Some of my friends gave speeches, sharing memories of our experiences and the bond that had carried us through both good and bad times. In the days following the wedding, Rob and I went on our honeymoon, which his parents had paid for as a wedding gift. I spent all my days just lazing around, enjoying time with my husband. I feel so thrilled every time I look at Rob and realize he's now married to me. As I mentioned earlier, I cut all contact with my parents by blocking them everywhere. I didn't bother sending them an explanation because frankly they don't even deserve it. I have no idea if Vicky really had a housewarming party that day, or if it was just an excuse for my parents not to attend my wedding, but at this point, I don't care. I wish them and their beloved daughter nothing but the best. Update 3. I didn't intend to share more after my last update, but something unexpected just happened, and I think you all deserve to know. I hadn't checked my email in the last month because of my wedding and honeymoon, but today, while going through emails, I found an email from Vicky. I don't even know how she found my email address, and it completely surprised me. I hesitated whether to open her email or just delete it unread, but as the saying goes, curiosity killed the cat. Inside was a long message from Vicky expressing her regret over our strained relationship and her desire to reconcile. She acknowledged the mistakes she had made in the past, admitting that she had been selfish and immature. Vicky apologized for the pain she had caused me over the years and expressed a genuine desire to make amends. She went on to write how she feels happy for me now that I am married and wishes me nothing but the best. She ended the email pleading with me not to punish our parents by cutting them off, and said that they missed me. Reading her words, I felt a mixture of emotions: surprise, skepticism. Part of me wants to believe that Vicky has really changed, that she is sincere in her apology and willing to work to repair our relationship, but another part of me remains doubtful because this seems too good to be true. However, regardless of what she wrote, I know for certain that my parents do not miss me, because if they did, they would not have treated me this way all these years. I thought about replying to her, but then decided against it. After all, forgiveness is not something to be rushed. It is a process that requires time and reflection. Still, I am unsure if I want to have a relationship with her again. I might forgive her, but that does not mean we are going to finally be sisters now. To be honest, after my marriage, I no longer feel lonely. I've learned to recognize that I have my loving husband by my side, supportive friends, and the unwavering love of my grandparents. And with their support, I know I can face any challenge that comes my way without needing Vicky or my parents in my life. I've also looked into and found a good therapist with whom I have booked my first appointment. I have taken this step to be able to address and resolve any wounds from my past and heal from them. Update 4. I believe I did the right thing by not responding to the email I mentioned in the last update, because now everything has come to light. It turns out that Vicky did not write anything, it was my parents using her account. That's why the email emphasized forgiving my parents so much, because they were the ones who had written it. I know this because I happened to run into Vicky one day, and when I greeted her, she looked at me with disgust as usual. I mentioned the email to her, thinking my lack of response was the problem, and she told me she hadn't sent anything. She pulled out her phone and found the email in the sent folder, but she swore she hadn't written it. At that moment, we both realized who the author was, since surely some computer at home still had Vicky's session open. I also asked her about the housewarming party, and she told me that it never happened, so as I suspected, it was all a lie from my parents. We then went our separate ways, and that was it. Honestly, I don't know who is worse in my life, my sister or my parents, because at this point what my parents did is just too twisted. At least now everyone will know, because I made a post on my Instagram with links to my Reddit, so the whole family and close friends are reading this story. Hello everybody, David here. Welcome. Here we share true stories from real people. Today, starting out with the first story. Husband forbids wife to date another man. She goes out anyway, and thinks she'll be forgiven. Man, those early years with Helen were something else, let me tell you. We were just a couple of dumb kids, barely out of high school, when we said I do in that little church ceremony. Everyone thought we were nuts, getting hitched so young. But we were crazy in love, you know. Couldn't keep our hands off each other. It was tough at first, I'm not gonna lie. We were broke as a joke, living in that crummy one-bedroom apartment, working dead-end jobs to make ends meet. But we made it work, you know. We'd come home exhausted, but we'd still find time to joke around, order a cheap pizza, and just be together. Those nights cuddled up on that ratty couch, that's what made it all worth it. Then Helen got pregnant with our first, little Sarah. Freaked us out at first, having a baby on the way with basically nothing saved up. But the second I held that tiny bundle in my arms, saw Helen's tired but beaming face, everything else just melted away. Suddenly, none of the money worries mattered. We had each other and our beautiful daughter. That was true wealth right there. The next few years flew by in this crazy blur. More babies followed, Sam, and then little Jessie. Our apartment felt like a clown car, but Helen and I wouldn't have had it any other way. We managed, getting by on love and laughs when the bills piled up. Sleepless nights, diaper changes, spit-up stains, man, those were the days. Crazy, loud, messy, but filled with so much freaking joy, you wouldn't believe. Don't get me wrong, we had our fights back then too. Money was always tight, the stress of providing for our growing family. It could drive a guy up the wall some days. But we'd blow off steam, have a good yell, and then afterwards, look, I'm no poet, but holding Helen close, feeling her heartbeat against mine, that's what brought me back every time. She was my world, my everything. We built this life together, mess and all. Those were some of the best freaking years of my life. For the longest time I was just scraping by, doing crummy landscaping gigs to support my family. Hauling sod, mowing lawns, back-breaking work in the hot sun. But I loved being outdoors, getting my hands dirty in the soil. It was honest labor, you know? One day, I'm at this rich lady's mansion, just another routine yard job. But she takes one look at my careful pruning, my attention to detail with her flower beds, and she's blown away. Starts asking me all these questions about gardens and plants. Turns out, I knew a hell of a lot more than I thought. Long story short, she offers me a job as a garden designer and landscaper for her fancy country club friends. The pay? More than I'd ever dreamed. I jumped at that chance like it was a lifeline, man. Suddenly, we could finally purchase our own house instead of renting that cramped shoebox. A real home for my family to spread out, a backyard for the kids to play in. I went from planting a few flower boxes to designing and building these elaborate garden estates for Westchester's upper crust. The money just started pouring in. We went from living paycheck to being able to actually save, to spoil the kids a little. Family vacations, nights out, giving Helen a chance to take a break from the mom grind. She worked so hard raising our babies, keeping that household running smooth on a tight budget. It felt freaking amazing to finally provide her with some luxuries. Sure, the business became incredibly demanding, putting in crazy hours to meet deadlines. But I didn't mind the long days, getting dirt under my nails. I'd come home exhausted but proud, excited to show Helen the designs I cooked up, getting her approval. She'd kiss me with that big smile, whisper my hard-working man in my ear. That's all the thanks I needed. We were able to put the kids through good schools, pay for their sports and activities. They wanted for nothing. My business grew into a local empire. By the time they were teenagers, we were living this crazy life I never could have imagined growing up poor. Saturday morning cartoons became luxury cruises. But you know what? We never lost sight of our humble roots. Those kids stayed grounded, hard-working. Just like their old man. For years, I thought our family was perfect. The kids were growing up happy and healthy, John's business was booming, and we were living comfortably. But then the nest started to empty. Sarah went off to college first, and I tried not to make a big deal about it. She's spreading her wings, that's good, I'd tell myself. But walking past her empty bedroom, it just felt wrong. Like a piece of my heart had been ripped out. When Sam left next, that void started whispering lies in my head. Your purpose is gone. The best years are behind you. You're just going to waste away in this big empty house. God, those thoughts tormented me. I put on a brave face for John, of course. Couldn't let him see me cracking. But the truth is, I was miserable. Our date nights, which used to be so fun and romantic, they didn't bring me joy anymore. I'd just go through the motions, smiling and nodding while my mind wandered. Pretty soon I was an expert at pretending. Pretending I was still the upbeat, happy wife he fell for. Pretending the empty nest didn't bother me. Pretending I wasn't jealous of his work, of how it gave him fulfillment while I felt so goddamn lost. The distance between us, it was like this gaping chasm that kept growing wider and wider. We'd be sitting on the couch together, but I'd feel millions of miles away. His words were static in my ears. My heart had just checked out of our marriage. I started picking fights over stupid stuff, just because I needed to feel something, anything, again. The passion, the fire we used to have, it was all fizzle out to bitter resentment. At least the yelling made me feel alive. if only for a little while. That's when I met Tommy at work. He was a few years younger, had this wild sense of humor that actually made me laugh again. For the first time in forever, I had someone to actually talk to, someone who seemed to really hear me and understand what I was going through. With Tommy, I could finally unlock those pent-up feelings about being an empty nester. He validated me when I felt useless and unseen. Talked me off the ledge when the suffocating. We developed this intimacy, this closeness I hadn't experienced in so long. I knew having a male friend was towing a line. Parts of me felt guilty about how much I looked forward to our chats, how much I craved that connection. But another part of me felt starved for it and convinced myself it was harmless. After all, John and I were still just roommates going through the motions at that point, right? For the longest time, things were good between me and Helen. We had our little hiccups here and there, but overall, it felt like smooth sailing. The kids were growing up, my business was doing well, and Helen seemed content with her job at the accounting firm. At least that's what I thought. Then this new guy started working there, Tommy, or whatever his name was. At first it was just casual mentions over dinner. Oh, the new guy in accounts is pretty funny, or Tommy really knows his stuff. No big deal, right? We all have work buddies we chat with from time to time. But then the mentions started getting more frequent. Suddenly, every other conversation was sprinkled with Tommy said this or Tommy did that. I tried not to read too much into it initially. Maybe I was just being paranoid or jealous for no reason. But little things started setting off alarm bells in my head. Like how Helen would be glued to her phone more often, constantly texting and smiling, and whatever was on that screen. Or how she'd come home later from work some nights, saying she was catching up on a project with Tommy. The worst part? Anytime I brought it up, she'd get defensive as heck. It's not like that, John. Tommy's just a friend from work, that's all. But the way she'd say it, all flustered and looking away, it made my gut twist into knots. Man, I knew something was off, even if I couldn't prove it yet. Then one night, it all came to a head. Helen was getting dolled up, putting on that red dress I used to love seeing her in. Said she was going out for drinks with some people from the office to celebrate a co-worker's birthday. Sounded innocent enough. But when I asked who all was going, she hesitated before mumbling, "Oh, just some of us from accounting. Tommy will be there too." That's when I freaking lost it. Started ranting about how this Tommy guy was bad news. How I didn't feel comfortable with her going out alone with him. Big mistake, she just got more defensive, accusing me of not trusting her and overreacting like always. We ended up having this massive blowout, screaming at each other until the neighbors must have heard the whole thing. After she stormed out that night, I just sat there in shock, my head spinning. This supposed friend from work was clearly driving a wedge between me and my wife, and she was letting him. The worst thoughts started creeping in, picturing them together, getting cozy over drinks. I felt sick to my freaking stomach. That's when I knew I had to do something, get to the bottom of what was really going on with this Tommy guy, before he ruined everything. I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off. That night when Helen dropped the bombshell about going out with her coworker Tommy, it freaking leveled me. We're sitting there having dinner like any normal night, and she just casually mentions she's gonna meet up with this guy from work later. My fork clatters onto the plate as I stare at her in disbelief. "What did you just say?" Helen shrugs, acting like it's no big deal. Tommy from accounting has been such a good friend lately, listening when I've been feeling down. "We're just going to grab a drink, catch up." Those words hit me like a freight train. My chest tightens and I can barely breathe. You're going on a date? With another man?" I can hear the hurt and anger rising in my voice. "John, relax, it's not like that." She has the nerve to actually roll her eyes at me. "Tommy's married too, he's just been a sympathetic ear when I've been struggling with, the empty nest and all. We're just friends." That revelation that he's married somehow makes it even worse in my mind. I slam my hand down on the table, plates rattling. So what? You're both just a couple of freaking cheaters now. This is how you want to trash our marriage. Her face flushes red and she jumps to her feet. Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's one stupid drink, not the end of the world. She throws her napkin down. Maybe if you paid more attention to me, instead of burying yourself in your stupid gardening business. From there, it just descended into a fully blown screaming match, years of pent-up resentment from both sides finally erupting. I'm shaking with rage, struggling not to just freaking lose it. She's crying, yelling how I'll never understand what she's going through. In that moment, it hit me, and my wife, my freaking soulmate of over 20 years, was willing to throw it all away over what? A midlife crisis? Some sleazeball co-worker feeding her bullcrap lies. I didn't even recognize the woman standing across from me anymore. We'd had our fair share of fights before, but none cut as deep as this one. This wasn't about laundry, or forgetting an anniversary. This was a mortal threat to everything we built our lives around. And she haven't seemed to care or get it. I'm not proud of how I acted, getting in her face, cursing up a storm. She gave as good as she got too. In that moment, all the love was drowned out by the screaming and the hurt. Our home stopped feeling like a refuge and started feeling more like a battlefield. When she finally grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door in my face as I begged her not to go, that's when it really hit me how freaking broken we'd become. I just sank to the floor as the tears came. How'd we let it get this bad? What happened to the Helen I fell for, the woman who was my whole world? That night's confrontation, it freaking shattered me in a way I'm still putting back together, even now. You know, when Helen first dropped that bombshell about going out with her co-worker Tommy, I was in freaking denial. Like, there's no way my wife of over 20 years would do that to me, to our family. We had something special, you know? Hell, I thought our marriage was rock solid. But the more she insisted on still going, the more my gut twisted into knots. This nagging voice in my head kept whispering, she's lying, she's hiding something. And the more I tried to shut it out, the louder it got. Damn it, I didn't want to believe it, but I had to know for sure. That's why I made the call to Jake, an old buddy from high school, who worked private investigations now. I must have sounded like a crazy person on that voicemail, rambling about needing his help to tail my own wife. But Jake's a good guy, he didn't judge. Just said he'd take the case and get to the bottom of things. Those next few days were freaking torture, man. I could barely sleep or eat. Just paced around the house replaying Helen's words over and over. It's just a friendly dinner, I swear. But why was she being so shady about the details? Why did her coworker have to be some other married guy? Too many damn questions with no answers. Jake would check in periodically with updates, where Helen went, what she did. Boring stuff at first, work, the grocery store, same old routine. But then she started going to this nail place more, getting dressed up nice. Red flag, am I right? My wife never fussed that much over her appearance unless it was a special occasion. And sure enough, the big night finally rolled around. Jake tailed Helen to this fancy restaurant downtown, where she met up with Tommy from accounting, or wherever the hell he worked. I could feel the bile rising in my throat watching the video footage of them hugging, acting all friendly. That snake had his hands all over my wife. Look, I'm no genius, but I'm not an idiot either. I knew from Jake's recon work that this Tommy Putz was supposedly some upstanding family guy. But here he was, whining and dining my Helen behind his wife's back. Lying sack of freaking crap, just like my own wife turned out to be in the end. Seeing those pictures of them two together, her hanging off his arm like that, that's when everything finally clicked into place in my mind. My beautiful wife, the love of my life, was having an affair. With that realization, Something inside me just shattered into a million pieces. The life I thought I had, the woman I lived for, it was all one big fat lie. You want the blow-by-blow of that night? The night everything fell apart. All right, buckle up. 6 p.m., Helen's dolling herself up like she's going to some freaking nightclub instead of a casual dinner. I try to stay calm as she's putting on that tiny black dress that hugs every curve. Just wanted to look nice, she says, with this sickening wink. But I know she's playing dress up for that dirtbag Tommy. 7 p.m., the PI I hired is in position across from the restaurant, ready to document everything. My gut is tying itself in knots thinking about what sleazeball moves Tommy might try to pull. 8 p.m., Helen's car pulls up to the valet. She looks around all nervous like before getting out. The dress is even worse in person, shows off more skin than it covers up. I'm already feeling sick. 8:15 p.m., Tommy arrives, dressed like a freaking GQ model. Who does this clown think he is? He puts his hand on the small of Helen's back as they head inside. I can feel my blood pressure spiking. 8:30 p.m., the PII snaps photos of them being seated in a secluded corner. Cozy little setup, just what every cheating scumbag dreams of, right? 9 p.m., my phone rings. It's Helen, putting on her fake sweet voice. Hi honey, just checking in at our favorite place. Like she hasn't just been lying to my face for weeks about this dinner. I barely choke out a response. 9:15 p.m. More pictures roll in from the PII, this time of Tommy leaning across the table, whispering whatever poison he's been filling Helen's head with. Her shoulders are tensed up like she's uncomfortable, but she's still playing right along. 10 p.m., an outside shot shows Tommy's hand creeping across the table to grasp Helen's. She doesn't pull away at first. I throw my glass against the wall, imagining it's that bastard's face. 10:30 p.m. in the parking lot now. Photos of them walking way too close, Tommy's arm around her waist. My heart is in my freaking throat. 11 p.m., the final images, them standing near Helen's car, saying their goodbyes. He pulls her in close, going for a hug that looks way too intimate. She lets him. Then he leans in, and I can't keep looking. I shut off my phone and just break down. After that, your guess is as good as mine. I blacked out from the pain, the sickness. Woke up surrounded by broken glasses and divorce papers scattered everywhere. My beautiful wife, my life partner, was gone. All because of that slimeball's mind games. I felt like the world was crashing down around me. All those years, that lifetime we built together, it was all a lie. At least, that's how it seemed in those first few days after Helen's night out with that dirtbag Tommy. I couldn't even look at her without feeling sick to my stomach. Every time I saw her face, I'd picture her dolled up for him, laughing over drinks, maybe even I don't want to think about what else might have happened. My mind would just spin out into these twisted scenarios, despite how much she swore it was innocent. I was a freaking mess, let me tell you. Couldn't sleep, could barely eat. Just paced around the house in a fog, wrestling with all this anger, sadness, questioning everything about my life. How could the woman I love more than anything do this to me, to our family? After decades of being ride or die, thinking we were in game. I felt so unbelievably betrayed. Work was out of the question. I called in for weeks saying I was sick, but really, I was just stuck in this pit of misery. The guys at the shop must have thought I was dying or something. I just couldn't focus on anything except the mental images torturing me, and this gnawing sense that my life was crumbling. Eventually, Helen moved in with her sister for a while to give me space. At first I was relieved to have her gone so I could process, But after a couple weeks, the silence and emptiness started eating away at me. I'd wake up looking for her beside me, catch myself setting out her coffee mug out of habit. Stupid little things, but they all reminded me of how she used to be my home. I trashed the house pretty good in those dark days, I'll admit it. Broke everything that reminded me of her. Wedding photos smashed, her lotions and perfumes went down the drain. Yeah, immature as hell, but it was this primal scream of hurt and rage coming out. Like if I destroyed every last trace of her, maybe this pain would go away. Of course, deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Helen wasn't some object I could just erase from existence. She was my whole dang world, the love of my life, and now, the source of my greatest anguish. I felt like I was trapped in some sort of emotional hellscape, and I had no idea how to claw my way back to solid ground. You know what really got me riled up through all this crap? Finding out Tommy, that sleazeball from Helen's office, was a married man himself. Can you freaking believe the nerve of that guy? I was so angry, so hurt by what was happening with my own wife, I decided I wasn't going to let his family stay in the dark. His poor wife deserved to know the kind of lying, cheating scumbag she was married to. I tracked down their address and showed up unannounced one night. Stupid move, I know, but I was seeing red at that point. This woman, Linda I think her name was, opened the door looking all confused. I could tell she wasn't expecting a visit from a raging stranger. Without even giving her a chance to ask questions, I started unloading everything. Told her all about how her husband was messing around with my wife behind both our backs. Laid it all out, the secret dinners, the emails, the whole sordid thing. Poor Linda, she just stood there in shock, hands over her mouth, while I went on my unhinged rant. The kids, they had 2 young boys, they came out wondering what the commotion was. I'll never forget the looks on their little faces seeing this crazy man screaming at their mom. By the time I was done, Linda was in tears. She kept shaking her head in disbelief, denying what I was saying at first. But then it hit her, the missed calls, the late nights at the office, the truth of her husband's betrayal. I felt awful, like a total piece of garbage for devastating their family like that out of the blue. But that slimeball had it coming for what he was doing to my marriage. If I was gonna burn, he could go down in flames with me. Things only got uglier from there. Shouting, crying, Linda throwing me out, it was an insane scene. As I walked back to my car, I could hear her screaming obscenities through the walls, that cheating bastard's name. Pretty soon, the whole neighborhood would know what her wonderful husband had been up to. Was it the right way to handle it? Probably freaking not. But in that moment, with my life crashing down around me, I didn't care about taking the high road. If I had to suffer, that lying prick was going to suffer too, marriage and family be damned. I wanted to hurt him like he'd hurt me. Guess that makes me a bastard too, huh? Where do I even start? That night out with Tommy was supposed to be no big deal, just a friendly dinner to get my mind off things. But the second I stepped out that door, I knew deep down I was crossing a line I shouldn't have crossed. The guilt was there from the beginning, like this heavy pit in my stomach that just kept growing and growing as the hours ticked by. I tried to brush it off at first, kept telling myself I hadn't actually done anything wrong yet. But with every glance at my phone, seeing John's frantic messages, the knot inside me twisted tighter. I remember sitting across from Tommy at that fancy restaurant, trying to focus on what he was saying. But my mind couldn't stop replaying John's words from earlier, the raw pain in his voice when he pleaded with me to come home. I could practically see the tears in his eyes. After over 20 years together, I knew that man inside and out. And in that moment, I knew I was completely shattering his heart into a million pieces. The food might as well have been sawdust for all I could taste it. Every bite felt like a betrayal, like I was consciously choosing to hurt the person I love most in this world a little more with each passing minute. What the freaking hell was I doing? This wasn't me, not the real me. But I couldn't stop myself. By the time Tommy dropped me off at home, I was an absolute wreck inside. Smiling on the outside, but my insides were screaming at me, hating myself for what I'd put John through. I'll never forget the look on his face when I walked through the doors of the devastation, the heartbreak. He searched my eyes, desperate for some sign that nothing had happened. But we both knew the truth in that moment. The trust, that bond we built over decades, I'd freaking shattered it into pieces. The days and weeks after were some of the darkest of my life. John could barely look at me, and I didn't blame him one bit. I'd give anything to go back and make a different choice that night, to feel his arms around me again, without this horrible rift between us. Counseling helped, a little. But no amount of talking could instantly erase the trauma I'd put him through, the mental images now seared into both of our minds. Sure, we're still together, putting the pieces back bit by bit. But that night, that one selfish, stupid decision, it's always going to be there, isn't it? A fracture in the foundation that can never be fully repaired, no matter how hard we try. Some scars just don't fully heal, I guess. All I can do is wake up every morning, look into the eyes of the man I betrayed, and pray he can find it in his heart to fully trust me again someday. I know I wouldn't if I was him. You know, after Helen walked out that night to meet Tommy, I was just numb. Like someone had ripped out my freaking heart and left me hollow inside. For years, she was my everything and my lover, my best friend, my whole world. And in an instant, she betrayed all of that. At first I just crashed on the couch, staring at the walls, trying to process what just happened. How could she do this to me? To us? After everything we'd been through together? The more I thought about it, the more this white-hot rage started building up inside me. I imagined all the ways I could get back at her, and that slimy bastard Tommy. Slashing his tires, trashing his place, heck, even putting him in the hospital, it all ran through my mind. This pit of anger and hurt was eating me alive. I wanted to make them pay for what they did to me and to our family. But then I'd look at our wedding photo or pictures of the kids, and I'd break down all over again. Decades of love and memories, potentially flushed down the toilet because my wife got a wandering eye. The betrayal cut so freaking deep, like a knife twisting in my gut. I didn't know what to do with myself. Some days I'd be consumed by thoughts of revenge, fantasizing about trashing Helen's stuff, or spreading nasty rumors about Tommy at work. Other times I'd be racked with sadness, questioning what I did wrong, and if I could have been a better husband somehow. The mind games were the worst though. Part of me started wondering if she'd actually go through with sleeping with that douchebag, or if it really was just a friendly dinner like she claimed. That shred of doubt made me feel even more crazy and pathetic. I've never felt so emasculated and humiliated in my entire life. This woman, who I thought I knew better than anyone, who vowed to love and cherish me until the end, threw it all away. Over what? A midlife crisis? Grass looking greener on the other side? It made me question everything about our marriage. Some nights I'd down a few too many beers, then wake up with a splitting hangover, but that dark pit of misery still weighing me down. Other times I'd go to work on autopilot, smiling at customers while feeling gutted on the inside. I was coming undone at the seams, all because of Helen's selfish choices. Honestly, looking back now, I'm not proud of the person I became for a while there. The anger twisted me up and brought out an ugliness that I didn't recognize as myself. If you'd asked me back then about getting revenge, well, I can't say for sure I wouldn't have done something really stupid that I'd regret. Helen's betrayal flipped my whole world upside down. Therapy. That was supposed to be our last resort, our final hope at saving what was left of our marriage after that whole nightmare with Helen and her co-worker Tommy. I'll be honest, I wasn't too keen on the idea at first. Sitting across from some stranger, spilling my guts about all the hurt and betrayal, felt like I'd rather swallow nails. But Helen insisted, said it was the only way forward if we wanted any chance at fixing things between us. So, skeptical as hell, I agreed. Those first few sessions were absolutely brutal, no two ways about it. We'd sit there in awkward silence, until the therapist would basically have to pry us open with a crowbar of questions. Then came the explosions, years of bottled-up resentment, and pain just pouring out in these heated screaming matches. I'll give the dog credit, She had the patience of a freaking saint, just letting us go at it until we had nothing left. Slowly though, something started to change. With the therapist's guidance, we started, hearing each other for once instead of just yelling. Helen opened up about her fears of being an empty nester, feeling lost and alone once the kids were gone. Stuff I never really grasped until she laid it out there. And me, I finally got to vent about how freaking betrayed I felt by the whole Tammy situation. How it shattered the one thing I thought I could always count on, her love and loyalty. Week after week, we'd unpeel another layer of crusty emotional baggage we'd been lugging around for decades. Some breakthroughs hit like a gut punch, like when Helen admitted she'd been dreading turning 40, afraid her best years were behind her. Other times, it was like having the scales finally fall away, like realizing her emotional affair wasn't really about me or any failing on my part. We both had our own junk we needed to unpack and work through. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't all deep talks and fuzzy feelings. We had our setbacks, days when we'd leave therapy angrier than we went in. The road was bumpy as hell, uphill both ways through a freaking minefield. But we kept showing up, putting in the hard work, because at our core, we still loved each other deeply. That ember, as faint as it had become, was still there, just needed some careful coaxing to reignite the flame. Eventually, slowly but surely, the therapy started to pay off. We remembered how to really talk, to listen without judgment or defensiveness. Rebuilt that foundation of trust and intimacy that had crumbled under the weight of all that hurt and disconnection. Don't get me wrong, we'll never be that deliriously happy newlywed couple again. Too much water under the bridge for that. But we found a new, more grounded appreciation for each other, and a life we built together, scars, flaws, and all. Freaking miracle workers, those therapists. You know, after all the crap Helen and I went through, it would have been easy to just call it quits. Lord knows I thought about it more times than I can count, lying awake at night, my mind racing with all the hurt and anger. Part of me wanted to just pack a bag and disappear, leave it all behind, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the freaking mess our marriage had become. But something kept pulling me back, you know. Call it stupidity or a glutton for punishment, but I couldn't let go of the dream, that beautiful vision of growing old together that had kept us going for so many years. I'd look at our wedding photo, see those bright-eyed kids so drunk on love and hope, and it would gut me to think of tossing it all away. The counseling sessions were brutal, let me tell you. Having to sit there, week after week, airing out our dirty laundry in front of a stranger, it took everything I had not to storm out of that office more times than I can count. But I'm glad we stuck it out, because it forced us to really listen to each other, to understand where the other person was coming from. For me, it was a wake-up call to how disconnected Helen and I had grown over the years, how I'd let my work consume me to the point of neglecting her needs. I'm not excusing what she did, that crap with Tommy will never be okay in my book. But I realized that my emotional absence had left this gaping hole in our relationship that allowed someone like that freaking scumbag to slither his way in. And for Helen, well, I think she finally saw the full extent of how much she'd hurt me, how badly she'd shattered the sacred bond of trust that was supposed to exist between a husband and wife. The tears, the shame, the regret, it was all laid bare in those sessions. And as painful as it was, I think we both needed that reckoning to happen. In the end, after months of working through that festering wound, we made the decision to give our marriage one more shot. Not because the hurt had fully healed, that kind of damage leaves scars you'll carry forever. But because underneath all the anger and pain, there was still a flicker of the love that had brought us together in the first place. A love worth fighting for, worth rebuilding from the ashes. Were things instantly perfect after that? How now? We still had our bad days, our setbacks, our moments where the past would rear its ugly head and we'd be right back in the thick of it again. But slowly, brick by brick, we started putting ourselves back together. Setting new boundaries, making time for each other again, rediscovering the simple joys that had been there all along if we'd only taken a moment to appreciate them. I'm not going to lie and say our relationship is exactly the same as it once was. That innocence, that youthful idealism, it's gone, dissolved by the harsh realities we've had to confront. But in a weird way, what we have now is stronger, more grounded. We've felt the sting of nearly losing it all, and having survived that, we cling to each other that much tighter. We've learned to not take the little things for granted, to soak up every precious moment as the gift that it is. Was the road to get here easy? Freaking hell no. It was hands down the toughest, most excruciating journey of my life. But now, as I sit here watching my beautiful wife sleep beside me, her face finally at peace after so much inner torment, I know it was all worth fighting for. Our love deserved that second chance, no matter how battered and broken it had become. So that's my truth, my confession laid bare, a tale of redemption after the darkest of betrayals. Will Helen and I make it to those golden years we dreamed of all those decades ago? Only time will tell. But I've got hope in my heart again, and for us, after wandering for so long in the wilderness, that's freaking everything. What are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more. Speaking of more, there are more stories of this type here on the channel, and one of them is now appearing on your screen. Click and you'll go straight to the video.